on debt and development. Let me just quickly say, we are having this Zimbabwe high-level debt conference at a time when we are trying to grapple with the devastation caused by Cyclone Idai and in Manicaland, a resource-rich province. And I'm seeing here that our national debt stock is about 18 billion, and Mugabe's remarks easily come to mind. How much was lost from Marange diamonds alone? 15 billion is more or less the same. And you would think that the fiscal capabilities in terms of response to the challenges that we are facing because of Cyclone Idai, had we managed our resource well, our mineral resources well, probably we would not be going to United Emirates, Dubai, to ask for aid. So I thought it's important that this minute of silence that we have observed, also we connected the dots between debt and illicit financial flows and poor management of our natural resources. But I'm already getting a message that stick to your mandate, Mukasiri. So let me do so. On behalf of ZimCode, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Zimbabwe High-Level Debt Conference. It is wonderful to see you all here on this day, and thank you all for setting aside your busy schedules to be with us. We are really grateful for that and looking forward to a successful, informative, and participatory. I would like to extend my special honor to representatives from government departments, civil society organization, ZimCode partners here present, members of the diplomatic corps, colleagues from academia, development agencies, media practitioners here present, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. As we are gathered here today, we are sitting on a deep-rooted social and economic crisis with varied symptoms, and one of them is national debt crisis we are faced with in Zimbabwe. We have a national debt stock of close to 18 billion, comprised of both domestic and external debt. Worrisome is the exponential rise in domestic debt within a short space of time, raising a key question on debt transparency. Despite the intensity of the public debt crisis in Zimbabwe, there is no clear roadmap towards sustainable debt management. Having realized this gap, ZimCode commissioned a research, sustainable, and inclusive debt management framework for Zimbabwe with the support of Frederick Eben Stiftang. The research was validated on 8th of March 2019 in Harare to solicit various stakeholder views meant to strengthen the paper. This conference is meant to foster common understanding of Zimbabwe's public debt challenge and the need to adopt a sustainable and inclusive debt management strategy. To popularize the sustainable and inclusive debt management framework for Zimbabwe and to set the tone for engagement with policymakers on debt question, and to create a platform for sharing experiences and views by government, members of the diplomatic corps, academia, private financial sector, and civil society on current issues and around the debt discourse. The Zimbabwe High-Level Debt Conference has come at an opportune time in Zimbabwe as the nation grapples with mismanagement of public finances. There is need for an inclusive approach to resolving the debt question which affects us all as a nation. We need to put our hands together, Parliament, civil society, central government, and the general citizenry. This conference is not an end in itself, but just a nod of the upcoming events and initiatives towards the attainment of sustainable and inclusive debt management in Zimbabwe. In the near future, ZimCode intends to engage in both local and international lobby meetings to engage bilateral and multilateral creditors. In this effort, there is need to speak and act together with the interests of the nation at heart, putting aside our differences. We are Zimbabweans first. I will not delve much into the nitty-gritties of the paper. I will leave it to the next speaker. Thank you so much and have a fruitful day.
Okay, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good, that's better. So if you look at your program, there are two facilitators, Joy Mabenge and Fadzai Tranquino. I suspect that perhaps half of this room is thinking this one speaking cannot be Joy Mabenge because of the name. Fortunately or otherwise, this one is Joy Mabenge. Many people think it's a female's name, but here we are. So Joy Mabenge is me. You content with me and Fadzai for the next perhaps 6 to 8 hours, if not slightly less. So we'll be your overall facilitators. Is that okay? Good. Fadzai.
Welcome everybody to this very important meeting on debt. And want to thank our hosts, ZimCode, for coordinating and hosting every one of us. But before we start the day, we would want to go through a round of introductions so that you know who your neighbor, whom you are sitting next to. If you have not already familiarized yourself with colleagues, you may be able to know the various stakeholders that we have. And so that also during tea break and other health breaks, you may also be able to collect a business card or two for future networking. So we'll start from right next to me. I will pass on the roving mic. Then you can just introduce yourself in the organization or institution that you're representing or the community where you're coming from. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Richard Mawari. I'm an economist with Stewart Bank.
Thank you. My name is Brezhnev Malava. I'm a journalist with the Zimbabwean Independent.
Morning, my name is Wisdom Mera. I'm a journalist with Open Pali.
Morning, I'm Claudine Matola from Zimbabwe Independent.
Good morning. My name is Ndando Ndlovu from Africa Groups of Sweden. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Chris Honeycutt from the American Embassy.
Morning, everyone. My name is Tapiona Shismango, representing the Female Student Network Trust.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Titus Mangoma from Nango Midlands, Kweru.
Morning, everybody. My name is Achilles Felaningoma. I'm with Women in Politics Support Unit.
Good morning. My name is Tsaurai Kambunda. I'm with Oxfam in Zimbabwe.
Morning, everyone. My name is Masimba Manyanya, Simkai Trust.
Good morning. My name is Mildred Mzanechita, ZimCode Manika and Regional Chair. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pretty Madek Famba from ABBA. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nomalanga Ncube, the ZimCode Vice Chairperson, and I'm from WG Foundation in Bulawayo.
Thank you. My name is Ngobizi Demlam with ZimCode.
Morning, my name is Florence Love with ZimCode.
Morning, my name is Batre Magoja with ZimCode.
Morning, I'm Israel Mabo from ABA ABBA.
Thank you. My name is John Maketo from ZimCode.
Morning, my name is Wopol from Frederick Ebert Stiftung.
Morning, my name is Joanne, economic analyst, and I'm also with Frederick Ebert Stiftung.
Hi, my name is Brian Kagoro. I'm with Uhaya Africa Limited.
My name is Freedom Marshall from Daily News.
Hi, my name is Ndakama Jaka. I write business, economic, and financial news for the Financial Gazette.
Good morning. I'm Felix Tapiwa Mona from Parliament of Zimbabwe, a member of Parliament for Chikomba Central Constituents, and I chair the Budget, Finance, and Economic Development Committee. Thank you.
My name is Mark Raidza, Member of Parliament from Berengwa East constituency and member of the Public Accounts Portfolio Committee. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pepkai Chouere. I work in the Parliament Budget Office.
Good morning. My name is Tafazo Chkumbu. I work with ZimCode.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Janet Joe. I'm with the Zimbabwe Coalition on Data and Development.
Good morning. My name is Mochanya Ramidzi from ZimCode.
Good morning. My name is Linet Tlachwayo from ZimCode.
Morning. My name is Nancy Nkomo from ZimCode.
Good morning. My name is Tongesai Wapunga. I'm with CVO Institute.
Thank you. My name is Costa Nkomo from 263 Chat.
Morning, Martha Mugweni, Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
Fidelity Mhlanga, Newsday.
Good morning. My name is Tatina Yanchega. I'm with Aphrodite.
Morning. I'm Philemon Jazzy with Diaconia.
Good morning. My name is Titus Gwem and I'm with Oxfam.
Good morning. Morning, my name is Bridget Mafusire. I'm with International Senior Lawyers Project.
Good morning. My name is Alik Mutandiro. I'm from the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority in the Strategy Research and Modernization Division.
Good morning. My name is Selek Mapeka. I'm with the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority.
Good morning. My name is Admaya Mtizwa. I'm with the Zimbabwe Council of Churches.
Morning. Reverend Gift Chanakira, Zimbabwe Council of Churches, Muzarabani.
My name is Eddie Cross, and I represent myself.
Thank you so much for those introductions. We do have a live streaming from Capital Radio. So as we go throughout the meeting, some of you may be called on to speak and share your views concerning debt management in Zimbabwe. Because you know you'll be on live radio, so it will be good to share some of your views. Then Secretariat from ZimCode will also share with us our hashtag, so that if you're able to also tweet and share on the Twitter account for ZimCode and tag along some of your colleagues at home, that will also be important to ensure that everyone is able to participate in this dialogue. I will just hand over to Joy.
Sure. Thank you very much, Fadzai. I think after the introductions, there is no doubt now that this is a high-level debt conference. The participants are really high-level and important people from communities and different institutions, which is a very good thing. Now, let's then set the tone. So inside your folders, you have a little booklet, Sustainable and Inclusive Debt Management Framework for Zimbabwe, SIDMAF. And the background to this is given as that one of the things that civil society organizations are known for is the critique, but we are often criticized as lacking in alternatives. So the government has attempted over several years from ZADS during the time of Minister Biti to the Lima Agreement during the times of Minister Chinamasa to the current engagement framework, perhaps contained in the short-term stabilization plan as driven by Minister Mtuli. Now, civil society often agrees or probably has an alternative view to what the government is putting on the table. It only makes sense to actually document also what you term to be the alternative. Put it out there and allow the nation to engage on alternative views. This is done in order to try and seek convergence in terms of issues of national interest. So this booklet is what ZimCode is putting on the table. In fact, it is the reason why we are here. We want to engage on the basis of this booklet and engage, agree, differ, converge, and have a position that we think might be helpful for the nation. We may not necessarily even need to agree, but it is important for alternative views to be put out there. So this booklet is the basis upon which this conference will proceed. The summary of this booklet is also contained right at the flip side of your program, where we have the concept note detailing this particular conference. So without further ado, in terms of also just locating myself in this conversation, I wish to declare my interest and say I am not alien to ZimCode, having worked with ZimCode for a very long time in different capacities. I am opinionated but my opinions are adequately contained in the ZimCode document, so my responsibility today is not to share any opinion, but to facilitate dialogue together with Fadzai. So you will not hear of opinions from our end, we will just facilitate dialogue. I think that's fair. That done, let's quickly move to the next session. We are going to have a keynote presentation, which is based on the booklet that is in your folders. And this keynote presentation is going to be done by Janet Jo, who is the Executive Director of ZimCode. Can we please give Janet a round of applause?
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone, and thank you for choosing to be with ZimCode on this day. I know there are so many conflicting, very important but conflicting processes that you could have chosen and prioritized, but we thank you that you have prioritized to be with us as we discuss the issue of debt, national debt, that has actually hindered us as a nation to move towards economic recovery. And as the chairperson said, we are Zimbabweans first, and there is need for us at one point to converge and discuss issues that are affecting us and try to come up with solutions that will also work for us all. I've always said that as Zimbabweans, Zimbabwe became independent in 1980, and we have faced many challenges along the way. And definitely, if you are Zimbabwean, 40 years almost, 39 this year, you have something to say about what is happening in our country, because you have experienced something from where you are coming from or from where you are sitting. And definitely at one point it hasn't been comfortable, I would say. Many times we've sat on the edge, and many times as well we have criticized, but not come up with alternatives or an alternative voice from our lived experiences. So as ZimCode, we did a research that included quite a number of stakeholders in trying to frame what we believe could give us a proper framework for debt management, management that is also hinged on having sustainability. Because we believe that there are so many traditional ways of dealing with the debt crisis that we have witnessed and experienced over the years. As a nation, we once went through the ESAP, and some of us know what it was like and what it felt like to lose a job, to pay a user fee at a hospital just to access health services, what it is to have your food and accommodation cut or privatized if you're in a tertiary institution and the like. These are the experiences that we felt and that we think of and that we remember when we talk about ESAP. And we know also in the region there are quite a number of experiences from colleagues in the region. It could be Zambia, it could be Mozambique, that have also gone through traditional debt relief strategies. For example, the Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. And as we speak, most of them, they've actually slid back into unsustainable levels of debt. With some of them, for example, like Mozambique, actually having what we call secret debt and pure theft because there was no debt transparency. The elites, they was just colluding with creditors and getting money over 2 billion. So these are, the hurdles and challenges that we have noted over the years and over time and from experience, which is why we are then coming up with a framework that would want to engage with civil society, with development partners, with the international community, which we are calling the Sustainable and Inclusive Debt Management Framework, which was an input of various stakeholders, including the Minister of Finance. We had interviews, ZIMRA, and many others, Investments Authority, academia, and the like. So I will just share briefly. This is a summary of the book. I think the book is about 35 pages, and I tried to summarize it into about 20 or so slides. So you'll bear with me. I'll rush through, but engage with the book as we continue to engage throughout the day as well. So I will share in terms of where we are on our debt. I will share in terms of understanding the debt situation itself. Then I will try to note the loopholes and gaps in the debt management framework that we currently have. Then we'll offer the alternative or the solution that we believe that the government and the creditors should take in addressing the debt crisis that we're currently facing. So we all agree that we are in debt distress and we cannot pay, and our debt from the figures that we have and also engagement that we have with the ZADMO. I'm happy that the Minister of Finance is here and they will shed more light on these technical issues as well with us and engage with us. But as at August 2018, our debt was at 17.67 billion, and our domestic debt accounted for 54%, up actually from 49%, which is the issue that we're talking about, the growth of the domestic debt exponentially. Then the external debt accounted for 46%, down from 51%, and I think this is also because of the repayments that have been done, but I'm sure the Minister of Finance will also explain that bit of a downward trajectory. But if you look at the graph, our debt is quite high and is on the rising side, the domestic debt as well. You can see that it is rising, and a very high external debt. The total debt is very high there. The external debt is somewhere here because we actually have not been receiving much, but the external debt, the domestic debt then going quite up. So the external debt, when we then dissect that 17.67 billion, is at about 7.7. And mostly I think the challenge that we have is that our debt is mainly in arrears. of 5.6, which is about 76% of our external debt is actually in arrears and mostly owed to the multilateral creditors. That's your World Bank, your IMF, your Africa Development Bank at 2.2 billion. Then the Paris Club, I'm sorry, here it's supposed to say 22 creditor nations. It's at 2.7 billion. Then the non-Paris club creditors are 700 million. And Bali Area's clearance strategy of 2018, the government has been prioritizing actually paying the 2.4 billion owed to creditors of choice. For example, the 680 million to the AFDB, the 1.4 billion to the World Bank Group, and the 308 to the Europe Investment Bank. But for us as ZimCode, as we prioritize in terms of the repayment of debt, there is the issue of the creation of fiscal space on social spending. So we believe that as we service our debts, there is something that has to suffer in a way, and this is how we then feel the impact of debt when it affects our social spending. Where we are in terms of domestic debt, I think it is worrisome, like we have indicated and said, that domestic debt continues to rise. So there's the emergence of domestic debt from as low as 275.8 million in 2012. But now, as we speak, it's around 9.5 billion. And the trend has been the issuance of TBs or treasury bills, which shot from 2.1 billion in 2016 to about 7.6 billion by August 2018 cumulatively. And January to June 2018, government actually continues to issue TBs and bonds, continued to issue TBs and bonds that were worth about 2.5 billion. And when we look in terms of percentages, we see there that they shot from 4.4% in 2014 to 36.5% by August 2018. And there are economists here, and they will share their experiences. And I can already see Dr. Chanakira coming in, and is passionate about the issuance of TBs, and he will share with us the impact and the effects of such. There is the issue of the RBZ overdraft to finance the government deficit, which was at 2.3 billion United States dollars against the statutory limit of 762.2 million. So there we see a violation in terms of the statutory limits in terms of our borrowing and overdrafts on the domestic market. But there is also a worrying trend around the assumption of debts by the government, and famous is the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe Debt Assumption Act of 2015, where the government assumed a debt of 1.35 billion. And last year, there was the Cisco Steel Debt Assumption Bill, which actually was enacted then, in which the government assumed 495 million in 2018, and giving a total of about 1.85 billion. And there is a facility which is called the ZAMCO. And as of June 2018, it had acquired 997 million from non-performing loans. So the idea is the government assumes non-performing loans to give clean balance sheets to the organizations or to companies that should actually have clean balance sheets for investment purposes mainly. The debt composition, when we're talking about our debt composition, I think there's the publicly and publicly guaranteed debt, and the figures are shown there. There's the external debt. We also owe bilateral creditors, the Paris Club, the non-Paris Club, multilateral creditors, the World Bank, Africa Development Bank, European Investment Bank, and also others. And also then we put the RBZ assumed debt. So this is how we tried to disaggregate in terms of exactly who Zimbabwe owes. And this is in your book as well. I'm sure you can also interact with it. But we see the percentages there, the high percentages, and the crisis, the level of crisis that we are currently facing. Then understanding the problem. What we see when we look at the Zimbabwe debt crisis is a violation of legal and constitutional provisions with respect to public finance management and reporting. And I'm glad that this is a candid conference where we want to engage on truth. And the Minister of Finance, the Minister himself in the National Budget Statement has actually highlighted these violations and admitted that violations have actually taken place in terms of how we have borrowed. So we have no steps that have been taken to authorize unbudgeted expenditures in violation of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, number 20 Act of Section 300, Amendment Act of 2013. Then we have the Public Finance Management Act, Chapter 22.19 of 2009, Section 61 on the thresholds in terms of how much the government should borrow. So the 30% and the 40% guarantees in terms of thresholds have been violated as well if we look at our debt. The government of Zimbabwe overdrafted the RBZ as well. I think I've indicated this as well. It violates the threshold in the RBZ Act of 2010, which speaks to the 25% of the previous government revenue. We have violated that as well. So public debt exceeds the limits is set out in the Public Debt Management Act as well. Chapter 22, Section 21 of 2015, with respect to the 70% debt to the GDP ratio. So you realize that our debt at almost 18 billion versus our GDP, we do have a crisis, and we have violated the 70% threshold. When we did the calculation before the rebasing, and it's something we can talk about, I think then it was around 137% in terms of that ratio. And Zimbabwe has also ratified, being also a member of the international community as well, the SADC Protocol on Finance and Investment benchmarks. SADC countries agreed that their debts will be around the levels of 60% maximum threshold. And Zimbabwe ratified this, and which means we have even the regional protocols that we have committed and ratified, we've also violated. I just, on this slide, for us to jog our minds and to talk as we discuss this, there's the rebasing of the economy from 18 billion to 25.8 billion. And for me and for many of us, it has created some bit of confusion then to say, we know that GDPs are in US dollars, but I'm sure this was done in the spirit of the one-to-one with our bond, when then they rebased to say our economy is 25.8. So now then the monetary policy statement brought the issue of the 2.5, their floating rate. So what does it mean then? Should it apply here? Is our economy really 25.8 United States dollars? What are the issues around this? Something to discuss. Otherwise, maybe if we rate it to even be lower or maintain it at that level. But there are challenges there that we can discuss, and I'm sure the ministry can shed more light as we discuss and share during the day. I just want to share in terms of the government efforts that we have noted since 2010 in terms of addressing the debt question. The issue is the debt crisis. It has been a process, and it did not just begin today, but it has taken place over the years. The red flags actually began way before 2000, thereabout, to show that we were going on the road towards debt and sustainability. So in 2010, the government came up with a holistic debt strategy, which was to address the issue of the defaulting of payments to the international financial institutions, where the external debt then stood at 6.9 billion in 2010, of which 70% or 4.8 billion was actually in arrears. And the holistic debt strategy by government was a hybrid model, which involved a combination of traditional debt resolution initiatives and also leveraging on natural resources for economic development. But the other key issue that was coming out was the issue of the mortgaging of natural resources or mineral resources, which is also an issue that we need to discuss when we are talking about the debt resolution strategies, to say that in as much as we may want relief, we have to safeguard the issue of the use of our natural resources, because natural resources, they don't only belong to us, remember, when we're talking about sustainable development. We also have to leave them for the future generations and not leave a legacy of debt, and also having depleted the natural resources for the future generations so that they will continue to suffer. So we need to safeguard and ring fence and ensure that we do not mortgage and end up selling our resources in the process of finding a debt resolution strategy for Zimbabwe. Then in 2012, the government of Zimbabwe came up with the Zimbabwe Accelerated Arrears Clearance Debt and Development Strategy. And we engaged a lot on this as well, because we were concerned in terms of the route that we were taking, whether it was going to give us actually debt sustainability at the end of the day, or address the issue of debt management at the end of the day. So the ZADs focused on trying to find bridging loans for debt repayment to fully clear arrears to those international financial institutions or creditors of choice. Then there was also a consideration to apply for the NEPO's terms, which apply to highly indebted poor countries for settlement of debts and arrears that were due to the Paris clubs, to members of the 22 country members that sit in the Paris Club, where Zimbabwe owes as well. So this would have included the issue of rescheduling of payments by maybe about 3 years, and then you get like 67% reduction in repayment obligations and rescheduling as well of the balance over several years. But the Paris Club, then the condition is also that they insist that a country must meet IMF conditions, and the IMF then must certify that the debt is actually not payable. There is a challenge, or there is a likelihood that the country will default because of the macroeconomic conditions maybe prevailing at that time. Then there was also a discussion around Zimbabwe fully going towards the HIPIC initiative, which would still require that you meet the IMF, you do an IMF program and the like, but then maybe lead to 90-100% of the debt being written off in the end. But there are regional experiences that have also alluded to, and Aphrodite, I'm sure they will also share with us in terms of how the HIPIC has failed in other countries in terms of arresting the debt crisis and bringing debt sustainability. Then it would have also included the issue of then negotiating for comparable debt relief with other non-Paris members and other commercial creditors to Zimbabwe. Then I think that did not yield much, and we came to the Lima that Joy has also spoken about in 2015. It was mainly as well to deal with the clearance of arrears and ensuring that Zimbabwe opens new credit lines. It included the issue of use of domestic resources. And Zimbabwe, as we speak, has already transferred part of its special drawing rights that are at the IMF. So the special drawing rights are like your reserve, you know, for those times when you really need to use those resources. And Zimbabwe used our special drawing rights of 107.9 million to clear the debt arrears to the IMF. So we have withdrawn from our reserves, and these are questions that we also have to ask in terms of sustainability, which means we have depleted in the SDR, and we have eaten maybe my resource or the future generation's resource already to clear arrears to the IMF. They are held by the IMF, and they were used to clear the IMF arrears. So these are also the paradoxes to it. Then the use of bridging loans, I think we talk about the Afrexim Bank to pay the AFDB loan. Then the use of medium to long-term loan facility. But like I've indicated, we haven't really seen much in terms of the implementation of this strategy, and I think it's because of the non-conclusive negotiations on settling the outstanding arrears. And I think I would want to believe that we have actually failed to clear the arrears because we still have them with maybe the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank, among others. But I think the government remains guided by the Lima strategy, as we hear from the minister. So it remains actually the effective strategy, but I'm sure the ministry has plans. I know in Bali the minister was there to share on a debt roadmap, but that we can engage on. But from these interventions that the government has tried to put in place in terms of arresting the debt crisis situation, we've noted some gaps and loopholes, and the main being the non-inclusive nature of these strategies that are being put in place for us as the citizens of Zimbabwe to be able to engage on them. And because at the end of the day, we do not want to remain feeling the impacts and effects of adjustments that come with them. We want to be engaged, and we want to share in terms of the roadmap that we should take. So as ZimCode, we do acknowledge the government efforts on debt resolution to date, though despite these strategies, the government has not been able to sustainably resolve the debt question, and I think it continues to spiral, especially on the domestic level. There is, for us, the absence of a debt sustainability plan, which has resulted in the accumulation of domestic debt. So what matters is really putting in place how are we going to manage our debt, and how are we going to ensure that there is debt sustainability at the end of the day. What we have seen is the efforts by the government towards repayment of the arrears, and I think the motive being to open new credit lines in order to kickstart the economic recovery process. The debt renegotiation and restructuring as well, I think it has ignored the human rights implications that come with these negotiations, and I think there is the whole buzz in our national budget statement and the TSP, the Agenda 2030 around the austerity for prosperity, and normally those two words will not sit in the same place if we're talking about people-centered development or a people-centered economy. Those two words are actually opposite. They did not consider also the impacts of contingent liabilities arising from guaranteed debts and assumptions on the government's financial positions. So there are liabilities in terms of assumptions of the debts that the government has been taking, and liabilities, I think, that could actually be put squarely on those that borrowed or the debtors before taking on the assumption. We believe that as well, the government in the strategies that have so far been implemented have ignored the structural and political challenges inherent in the economy. That's the poor governance, fiscal indiscipline, corruption, fraudulent activities, and sometimes pure theft, because we have analyzed the Auditor General's reports from 2009, and we have realized, and the Auditor General's reports have brought about many challenges that are happening in state-owned enterprises of mismanagement and misgovernance of public resources, actually with impunity. The process also was limited, as I have indicated, where the government and creditors have only been engaging at that level and leaving out actually bear the brunt at the end of the day. Parliament and civil society, we have remained as spectators. I think we are going to hear from Parliament in terms of whether, because they have a duty and a role in terms of oversight on public finance management, which is constitutionally provided for, but they also represent us as the citizens of Zimbabwe. But I don't think they have engaged in much in terms of the loan construction processes as required by the Constitution. So having noted those loopholes, as the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, we are pleading and engaging with stakeholders to consider having a sustainable and inclusive debt management framework. And it has got 4 components that I will briefly talk to. One is the issue of the need for a comprehensive debt audit. We need to really understand, and I'm glad that when the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance was before Parliament, he indicated that actually they've initiated a process of a national debt audit. We can discuss that process and how we would want to have it, but at least we are glad that there are those considerations to have a debt audit. So we will need to have a national legislation which will give us periodic debt audits, starting with the current debt, which is historic. If you look at the debt structure of Zimbabwe, it's also historic. In 1980, we inherited a loan from the previous regime of about $706 or so million that the government inherited. But it brings a lot of questions around odious and illegitimate debt, but that will be discussed later. But a debt audit will give us, in terms of exact figures of when we received the money, from who, and it was used for what, did it realize human rights for the people, and the like. So the debt audit, we believe that as a first step, we inform the debt resolution. For it will also inform how we'll go about future borrowing by the state. It will also address the issue of coming up then with a debt strategy that will ensure that there's debt sustainability, and it should have a human rights action plan in it, in terms of bringing about the nexus between debt and human rights. Those are just examples where I was just indicating that there may be challenges there. I think the debts that we have assumed from the RBZ, from the ZISCO, and also, generally under the ZAMCO. Within the debt audit that we're talking about, we would want to have also a social debt audit, which can give us the social and economic impact analysis. It will be very important to have when we are carrying out this national debt audit, so that we understand implications on poverty, on inequality, how debt has actually exacerbated inequalities, on social development, on human rights, and specifically on gender as well. Citizens, like I've also said, have suffered for the past 38, 39 years, and austerity measures that are normally associated with debt repayments and re-engagement processes, they undermine the capacity of the government to deliver social services. And normally then the women and the young, the sick, the elderly, the people with disabilities, they suffer most in terms of the impacts of austerity measures or the conditionalities that come with debt, loan contraction itself, but also with repayments. When we have done a debt audit, we believe that we can then, as a nation, for debt cancellation of odious and illegitimate debt, which we believe actually is mad. Our loan contraction process is actually mad with illegitimate and unauthorized contraction, which is in violation of national laws and also constitutional provisions. And I think we've spoken to this in terms of the constitutional provisions and the legal frameworks that have so far been violated, which brings in the issue that there is definitely illegitimate debt. Then there is the issue of the odious debt, which then we can campaign for. These are loans that did not benefit the ordinary citizens, and were actually used to suppress the citizens of Zimbabwe. And just examples there, I think we've spoken about the 1980 debt, but also there's the loans from, for example, the UK government between 1980 and 2000. They actually assisted this government in buying Land Rovers or the Santanas for the Zimbabwe Republic Police. Particularly the 1998 one is of concern to us at the height of repression, which was actually used for human rights violations. Then there is the issue of illegitimate debt to be cancelled. The UN has done a report around the issue of foreign debt and human rights. So it may be good to also put the Zimbabwe's debt within this framework, because they have what they refer to as financial complicity, where institutions actually lend to governments that go on to violate people's human rights. And I believe that there could be actually that debt that we could campaign for cancellation under the odious and illegitimate debt based on the financial complicity issue of the UN Independent Experts Report. When we look at it, Zimbabwe's debt crisis is also an outcome of corruption and elite enrichment. Talk of the RBZ debt, talk of the ZISCO steel debt, the ZAMCO. We all know that the RBZ was undertaking quasi-fiscal activities and funding, for example, the agriculture mechanization program. But people, the elites actually benefited from that loan, and there should have been a due process in terms of collateral and ensuring that those people will pay back. And definitely the Zimbabweans cannot carry that burden. Then there's the austerity measures that protect multinational corporations through excessive tax concessions. We know we have a special economic zones policy, and it It may also come, I think this is just to give as an example that it's kind of an ESOP on its own. We are on ESOP 2.0, if we might say, if we go the austerity route, and it has got big challenges there. The poor normally subsidize the debt obligations of private interest when we're talking about the odious and illegitimate debt. I think we know of the 2% tax, which was meant to actually address or pay back the domestic debt, and how there was an outcry amongst the Zimbabweans, and how we continue to be shortchanged in terms of paying for debts using that 2% tax, as the government tries to widen the tax base. We're still, the government will be cutting on social spending, also further then worsening the social conditions of the poor. And I'm sure we know in the health sector, there was the famous video where a senior doctor was actually crying in terms of the conditions under which they are operating. So the government cuts on social spending, it squeezes out the citizens in terms of taxation, but multinational companies, they go untouched. Because of tax concessions and incentives also coming through the austerity that we are talking about. So the main victims then of the debt crisis in Zimbabwe are the least responsible actually for the loan contraction process, because you also have to understand the political economy of debt in Zimbabwe, and actually in most developing countries. From where you and me are sitting, we are too far from the center actually in terms of the decision making and where things actually happen. Okay, I have 5 minutes. And normally then that's political economy. It marginalizes us in terms of the benefits, but then we are the ones who count the social and economic costs of the debts that we are talking about. And unsustainable debt, it undermines development with unacceptable consequences in health, education, and also other social services. Let me just run through. These are also then some of those issues that I was just raising in terms of pushing for cancellation of odious and illegitimate debt. It has happened, the UN have put it there. But just as an example, I have the Norway 2006-2007. It was one of those countries that accepted actually the concept of creditor co-responsibility when it becomes to the issue of lending. And it cancelled debt to Egypt, Ecuador, Peru, Jamaica, and Sierra Leone, because they also believed that they were responsible. There should be principles around responsible lending and responsible borrowing. In this case, they have actually lended funds to these countries to buy some sheep, but not because of the interests of those 5 countries, but because they wanted to promote a company in Norway that was facing challenges in terms of accessing markets to sell its sheep. So when they looked at it in terms of national interest for the credit for the debtor countries, they realized that they had actually just been motivated for supporting their company in Norway, but not necessarily for those countries. And they actually cancelled a huge debt for those 5 countries. And if it was done, I'm sure it can also apply in Zimbabwe, and we can learn something from there. The debt audit will give us, in terms of how we can deal with the multilateral debt settlement, I think a genuine re-engagement with multilateral, bilateral, and private creditors is needed without necessarily the conditions that normally come with debt cancellation. And we have an SDG framework that is in place that I believe that if the multilateral creditors could consider, could work with the United Nations, the UNDP, they are here, so that we have funds that are reserved after the debt cancellation towards the attainment of SDGs. And we have 1 to 7 and 10 that speaks to no poverty, zero hunger, good health, well-being, gender equality, and reducing inequality. And we believe these are some of those SDGs that then resources from the debt cancellation could come from. Could actually be targeted to, I'm sorry. Then the bilateral debts, because we also owe bilaterally, and there is a key example of Germany. They actually have this, and we owe Germany as well, and we believe we could negotiate. Zimbabwe qualifies, it has an outstanding order debt to Germany, it is classified as a low income country and the like, so that's the criteria, and we could actually qualify. But the issue is, when do we then access these resources if we go towards the cancellation of this debt? Domestic debt, I think we really need to prioritize the debt servicing for debt owed to service providers so that they can be able to provide. But the national budget statement of 2019, the minister said that they were doing away with the non-performing loans facility and the ZAMCO, and we are really watching to see that this has been done away with, but they maybe need to revisit some of these issues, sticking to the constitutional provisions in terms of the thresholds that are set. When we talk about the assumption, I indicated that citizens feel betrayed because in the parliamentary public hearings around the debts, for example, Zisco, RBZ, we rejected the assumption of these debts. But as taxpayers, we endlessly pay for state-owned enterprises, mismanagement, fraud, and mediocrity, actually without any accountability. But we are the citizens who pay for all this, and we cannot have this continue. And the protection of the elite as opposed to the majority poor, we cannot continue to have that, it is said. So would want to see the engines there in terms of debt sustainability, going to our constitution, issue of transparent, accountable, and inclusive inclusive loan contraction process, which includes the citizens and parliament. Would want to see a strong and functional autonomous debt management office, and that's our ZADMO doing its work in terms of providing the technical assistance to the ministry, to parliament, and to everyone, and the details and information around our debt and loan contraction process. We believe that will allow us to move on. The slides will just explain what a transparent and accountable inclusive loan contraction process will look like. So I won't go there. The constitution, I think constitutionalism, we've spoken about that, and the issue of building strong institutions, particularly the ZADMO, so that it can then deliver. But they are also supporting pillars for debt management, which is why we're going to have some presentations around domestic resource mobilization, because these are alternatives. How do we ensure that we strengthen our domestic resource mobilization, plug illicit financial flows in the extractives, for example, harness more in terms of taxes by widening our tax base that targets actually multinational companies, having an investment framework that rationalizes tax incentives issues, but also non-fiscal benefits that companies could continue to enjoy. There's also the need to deal with the public finance management framework, but to ensure that there's proper management of our national resources, but also revamping our industrial and trade policies, especially including the informal sector that we know of and building it from there. So this is the framework in summary that I just wanted to share, but I think we have reached a critical moment and we really need to win ourselves from the debt trap and the associated macroeconomic stagnation that we're currently facing. And the vision that we have may actually become a fallacy, the Vision 2030, if we do not address the debt issue in a holistic manner that ensures that we have debt sustainability at the end of the day. So the government would need to then deal with structural, political, and inclusive macroeconomic policies as part of a sustainable and inclusive debt management strategy. So in conclusion, I think that is all, but I just wanted to share in terms of as we are moving forward, I think the issue of promoting debt transparency is really key for our country going forward. And I just have an example there of the debt clock. Tafadzo, I see it's not there anymore. Can you just go? I know that every situation nothing is really perfect. Just go on that. Sorry, just go there. Yeah. Nothing is perfect as such in practice, but I think in theory we need to strengthen the issue of debt transparency going forward. And I just wanted to share in my researches and also interactions, I met with this debt clock. So countries subscribe to, having their debt being so transparent and known, and I just picked on South Africa because it is very nearby and it has got a role to play. Right now, Zimbabwe is appealing for a bailout, in South Africa, but it is not actually including Parliament and involving Parliament and the citizens of Zimbabwe. But if you go on the internet, you'll find out there is a debt clock for South Africa, where every citizen knows that South Africa owes that. I'm JZ's daughter. I may not be able to count those numbers, but I think it's 2 trillion and whatnot, and going like that. And Tafadzo, can you just go down? It will show you actually interest payments per year, interest payments per second, and your debt as a citizen. I think if we can reach such kind of transparency in our debt, we would have done very well and would have empowered the citizen of Zimbabwe to be able to engage with their policymaker. It has got its own challenges because maybe it doesn't include certain debts, but at least the starting point in terms of empowering the citizen with information on how they should deal with this. And it fits very well within this framework that we are proposing. I thank you.
Thank you, Janet, for just sharing briefly the report. So if you had not had sight of it before the meeting, I believe that you now have quite a good conceptual framework on what the research is all about, some very prudent recommendations as well that SimCode is also recommending to be adopted. I just want to quickly invite to the panel. Our first panel is responses to debt strategy, and we are going to invite Honorable Felix Mona, Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Budget, Finance and Economic Development, to join us on the panel. We will also invite Mrs. Martha Mugweni from Zimbabwe Aid and Debt Management Office, who will also share their reflections from that particular office, what is happening in terms of debt management and the responses of government. So these are our 2 panelists for this session. Let's give a round of applause to Honorable Mona.
Good morning to you all. Good morning. Thank you very much. Where I come from, I'm a village boy. We respect protocol. So allow me to thank the esteemed facilitators, Mkoma Joy and Tete Fadzai, ZimCode Board Chairperson, Brother Mkasiri Sbanda, Executive Director, ZimCode, Madam Janet Jou, my fellow Honorable Member of Parliament, Honorable Raidza, and my fellow former Honorable Member of Parliament, Mkoma Eddie Cross, thank you very much for coming. I also want to acknowledge the presence of senior government officials here present, members of the civil organization, civil society organization, and the development partners, members of academia, members of the business community, and I can single out Mkoma Nigel, Chanakira, members of the Fourth Estate. I'm sure you'll be having stories and stories thereafter. And ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, allow me to, you've seen that Madam Janet has posed a number of accusations, and that need to be, there are accusations and you need to respond. And I'm glad that our constitution, you are given the right to respond. But we are here not to defend the position, but to say out the truth and the only truth. And as honorable members, we take oath so that we represent the interests of the people. Let me start, I'm sure maybe you can also follow on the screen. The issue of transparency and accountability is quite topical to us as members of parliament. Accountability refers to a principal-agent relationship where the agent is accountable and is to explain and justify his or her actions to the principal, who may impose sanctions if the explanation is found lacking. On the other hand, fiscal transparency refers to the publication of information on how governments raise, spend, and manage public resources. Section 298 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe emphasizes the need for transparency and accountability in financial matters. As such, the role of Parliament in promoting transparency and accountability is clearly embedded in legislation. Worldwide, legislatures are becoming more assertive, resulting in the reclamation of the power of the purse and more involvement in the budget process. Strong parliamentary engagement in the budget process, both ex ante and ex post, is crucial to ensure that not only the needs of the electorate are met, but also that public money is equitably raised, well spent, and properly accounted for. The role of Parliament in strengthening transparency and accountability in public finance management. The role of Parliament is clearly spelled out in Section 119 of the Constitution, which says that, subsection 1, Parliament must protect this Constitution and promote democratic governance in Zimbabwe. Subsection 2, Parliament has power to ensure that the provisions of this Constitution are upheld and that the state and all institutions and agents of government at every level act constitutionally and in the national interest. 3, for the purpose of subsection 2, all institutions and agents of the states and government at every level are accountable to Parliament. This constitutional provision confers Parliament with 3 core functions: lawmaking, executive oversight, and representation. The legislative role, which is one of our mandates as Parliament. Parliament performs its legislative role by enacting legislation for the good governance of the country. Primary lawmaking powers are vested in Parliament, notwithstanding the fact that legislative authority may be conferred or delegated to other bodies and authorities in accordance with Section 117, subsection 2, Part C, read together with Section 134. In accordance with the provisions of Section 130 of the Constitution, Parliament makes new laws and change or improve old ones. In this regard, Parliament is eagerly awaiting the Public Finance Management Act that will strengthen public finance management in the country through aligning the Act of the Constitution and introduce new provisions guided by international best practice. With regards to debt contraction, there is realization of the need to strengthen our legislation by revising limits on government guarantees and setting them as a percentage of total debt. Our oversight role. The Constitution of Zimbabwe gives a broad mandate of Parliament oversight of all state revenues and expenditure in order to ensure financial probity in the utilization of public resources. Section 298 provides inter alia that there must be transparency and accountability in financial matters. It gives prominence to the fact that public funds must be expended transparently, prudently, economically, and effectively, and that public borrowing and all transactions involving the national debt must be carried out transparently and in the best interest of Zimbabwe. Section 299 goes further to mandate Parliament to monitor and oversee expenditure by all state institutions in order to ensure that all revenue is accounted for. All expenditure has been properly incurred, any limits and conditions and appropriations have been observed. Oversight forms and techniques that have worked well for Parliament include A, scrutinizing government policies, programs, and expenditure plans in order to ensure that they are in line with legislative intent and that they are governed by documented policies and procedures. B, specialized investigations by portfolio and thematic committees. C, budget hearings and consultations. D, field visits. Field and site visits. E, quarterly and monthly budget reviews. F, plenary debates, question time, or oral evidence sessions, among others. Individual members can raise questions or move motions that relate to government policies and programs in accordance with Section 107 of the Constitution. The oversight role is meant to protect public funds from abuse in terms of the provisions of the Constitution, as well as standing orders. Parliament has power to conduct oversight of all organs of state, including those at provincial and local government level. It entails the reviewing and monitoring of operations and activities undertaken and implemented by the executive. As such, Parliament plays multiple roles in public finance management, ranging from budget approval, budget implementation, to making government account in as far as achievement of macroeconomic objectives are concerned. With regards to national debt issues, oversight is undertaken through ensuring that the Minister of Finance reports at least twice a year to Parliament on the performance of loans raised by the state and loans guaranteed by the state as provided for in Section 300, subsection 4 of the Constitution. The statement must be comprehensive as stipulated in Section 300, subsection 4, subsection B. Parliament then interrogates the submissions to ensure that the quantum of debt is in line with limits set in accordance with Section 300, subsection 1 of the Supreme Constitution of Zimbabwe. These limits include A, total outstanding publicly guaranteed debt as a ratio of the gross domestic product. And I'm sure Madame Jo alluded to this, and I'll not labor you to go through that. I'll move on to B, aggregate amounts that may be guaranteed in any financial year not exceeding 40% of the general government revenue in the previous year, in accordance with Section 61 of the Public Finance Management Act. And C, borrowing from the Reserve Bank not exceeding 20% of the previous year's government revenues at any given point, in accordance with Section 11, subsection 1 of the Reserve Bank Act, Chapter 22.15. As noted in A, the limits fixed may be exceeded in any financial year if the minister obtains the authority by resolution of the House of Assembly to do so. Section 11, subsection 2 of the Public Debt Management Act provides that, I quote, the aggregate of the amounts that may be borrowed in terms of subsection 1 in any financial year by way of loans shall not exceed the limit fixed by the National Assembly, which limit the minister may propose to the National Assembly for approval by resolution or by means of a provision in a financial bill, end of quote. This implies that Parliament has a role to ensure that borrowing to finance budget deficit in any fiscal year is within reasonable limits. Reasonable deficit is that which does not push the national debt above the 70% threshold. Oversight is further conferred by provisions in the Public Finance Management Act, Chapter 22.19, in Section 15, which outlines reports that have to be laid before the House of Assembly by ministers, and Sections 15.32 to 35 that compels minister to submit monthly and quarterly financial and accompanying reports to the Accountant General, the Auditor General, and the respective portfolio committees. Section 12 of the Audit Office Act, Chapter 22.18, also specifies reports that Parliament must receive from the Auditor General as part of its oversight function. It is only Parliament that has the power to grant approval for the withdrawal of funds from the Consolidated Fund to meet the expenditures of government through the passage of the Appropriations Act as provided for in Section 305 of the Constitution. Citizens must obtain justifications and explanations from the use of public resources from those entrusted with the responsibility of their management in order to progressively realize human rights. Government, who are the duty bearers, has a corresponding obligation not only to produce such justifications, but to take corrective action in instances where public resources are not effectively utilized. Citizens have the right to demand these justifications and explanations from the state when it fails to provide them adequately. Effectively, oversight has the potential to help in curbing corruption, reducing gaps between planned and actual budgets, and even leading to greater efficiency in ministries, departments, delivery of service within the shortest time possible. Our representation role. The representation role of Parliament stems from the fact that the majority of members of Parliament in both houses are directly elected. Members of the Parliament can raise constituent issues on behalf of the electorate during the parliamentary question time on Wednesday in the House of Assembly and on Thursdays in the Senate. MPs are therefore expected to represent the aspirations of the electorate and engage in debates that give prominence to the wishes and will of citizens. Reflections from the role of Parliament in debt oversight. As representatives of the people, Parliament views citizens as active holders of fundamental rights as espoused in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights of 1948 rather than as passive users of public services. In this regard, a huge debt burden for a country infringes on the rights of future generations who ultimately have to repay the debts. Moreover, service delivery may be compromised when a huge chunk of resources goes towards debt servicing or when huge debt burden compromise a country's access to capital to improve service delivery. Some debt repayment methods like adjusting interest rates or inflation infringe on ability of government to provide services, hence infringe on people's rights. Extreme indebtedness has a bearing on attendant inability to fulfill human rights obligations to the citizenry, which is inconsistent with Article 28 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Debt service decisions, therefore, have to be made after engaging the citizens who are the principals through public consultations, civil society organizations, or Parliament, which is an embodiment of people's aspirations. Debt contracting has to be approved by Parliament as mandated by the citizens and as enshrined in the Constitution. This enhances accountability, transparency, and inclusiveness in the loan contraction and debt management process to enable citizens to actively participate in monitoring the public resource management framework to give effect to the right to social accountability. Parliament also has to oversee that all contracted debt is used for the intended purpose and that funds set aside for debt servicing actually get to their intended use. The guiding principle here is that the state must refrain from interfering with or curtailing the enjoyment of human rights, either by diverting funds to debt service, imposing huge debt on future generations, or infringing ability of citizens to access services in one way or the other after due to debt service or contracting conditions. I'm now concluding, Madam Fadzi. Information that can be provided to citizens include who and how much is owed, the purpose and conditions under which loans were given, whether objectives were met, charges other than interest and benefits, if any, that accrued to citizens as a result of the loans. Government, on the other hand, will make reforms to complement energized citizens, including stopping debt assumptions for parastatals and state enterprises, undertaking strong economic reform policy to provide strong impetus to efforts geared at accelerating accumulation of capital, productivity, and economic growth, build confidence and enhance the country's ability to meet future external debt obligations when they fall due, and ensuring that all loan agreements are pursued and approved by Parliament before entering into force. Our esteemed delegates, this is the end of my presentation, but before I take sit there, I want to leave you with a very important section in our Supreme Constitution, section 129K. So as we deliberate and engage, we also have to bear in mind that section. So I'll actually ask Nkoma Richard here, so that you then share with the rest of the delegates about this section 129K of the Supreme Constitution. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Mona. I believe we have good reflections on the role of Parliament and what the Constitution says in terms of public finance management. You remain there for a plenary, so if you can note any observations or comments that you may want to pose to him later, we will now invite Ms. Martha Mgweni to also make her presentation. She's coming from Zimbabwe Aid and Debt Management Office. Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, honorable members of parliament, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. I have to apologize. The minister was supposed to present, but due to other commitments, he failed. He assigned Mr. Vumbe, who is now the head of debt management. He also failed due to other commitments. So I will just present what I can as a technical person. And when you are asking questions, please, I'm requesting technical questions. When it comes to other issues which the minister has to respond, I request written questions which I can present to him and he can respond in writing. Thank you very much. So on the numbers which were presented by ZimCode, I must say as government of Zimbabwe, welcome this initiative where we have to start working with the civil society and move towards one objective. But I quickly looked at the document because I only got it yesterday. In terms of the legal framework, I think there are some amendments which we need to do in the document because they are still referring to Public Finance Management Act. That section was repealed by the Public Debt Management Act and moved to the Public Debt Management Act. So that it need to also to be addressed. The second issue I observed with that quick glance, we will provide detailed comments to ZimCode before they finalize in terms of the numbers and other issues which we just need them to be factual. Because any other issues we are saying, they can tell us what they feel we should do as government, and we'll welcome that initiative. So in terms of the numbers, I noted there were some questions where Madam was saying in terms of the rebasing of GDP. I think that methodology is an international methodology because what the GDP were using was outdated. So we were using outdated numbers. So as and when the time comes, our fiscal department works together with Zimstat and they come up with a real GDP which we have to use. And as an office, we just take their numbers and we use those numbers. So when we factor the numbers, we are also seeing some discrepancies in terms of the percentage to GDP, which I'm inviting ZimCode that maybe we need to reconcile the numbers, and then when we report, maybe we can see where. But when we worked as an office, we are still within the limit approved by which is within the Public Debt Management Act. So as a presentation, we are saying they were using the August numbers, but we are now having the preliminary numbers for external debt as at 31 December 2018, where we are saying our public and publicly debt, external debt is now at 8.16 billion. And when we put it as a percentage of GDP using the new numbers, is 33.2% of GDP. And then we were also looking at the ZAMCO numbers. ZAMCO numbers were within the 9.6 which we reported in August. But what we have realized as an office is ZAMCO, what they did, they went to the financial sector, took over private debt. And the private debt, they are restructuring that to make it payable, to make it sustainable. And they are paying that from the restructured formula they did with the clients. So this one, we are discounting it also from our public and publicly guaranteed debt. We are still discussing. So when we remove that, our total debt as in end of December 31 will be 16.6 billion, not the one we reported in August. Those are the comments I had. Then the other comments I had is on the Reserve Bank data assumption and the ZISCO data assumption. As government, we are given law by Parliament. So that law, we only took it from Parliament and we are implementing. So whatever we are doing it in terms of the acts approved by Parliament. So our mandate as a ministry or as an office is just to implement laws given by Parliament. And we are saying we are agreeing with the ZimCode in that the continuous accumulation of arrears, that one is not sustainable. And in terms of moving forward, we need to remove that in our books. And the challenge with Zimbabwe is, as we speak, almost 100% of our debt is in arrears. So when we say arrears, we are saying the debt has to be paid today. So hence, they need to come up with an arrears clearance strategy, which we said they have explained. We started with ZADS, we moved to Lima. We are still on Lima, but now with the TSP, what we are doing is improving on the re-engagement. And we had to use our SDR because in terms of international best practice, the way the international market is formed is that the IMF is called a preferred creditor. And if you have arrears with the IMF, you can talk with nobody because the major countries are the shareholders in those. So that is why we ended up using our SDR because it was also affecting technical assistance, which allows the ministry to work properly. We are also a member. There are rules and regulations we have to comply with. And we ended up taking our SDR from the IMF, which were allocated, and the debt we cleared now is allowing us to re-engage with the IMF. Though they work as a team, we still have to move to the World Bank group, the ADB, and other multilaterals and bilaterals. There's already explained in the presentation. But in addition to that, we are saying the structure of the Zimbabwean debt is in such a way that when we are talking of the multilaterals and the Paris Club, we are forced to work with the IMF. We have no choice. Unless if we can get our own resources, which we are saying also using our own resources is a challenge, because though we have talked about the mineral resources, they are underground, we still need somebody to dig those resources, give us cash and pay them, which we have not managed to do because of our other fiscal challenges. Then on the issues to move forward with the new strategy in line with the TSP, which says the government is now re-engaged with the international community. After clearing the arrears in 2016, we continued re-engaging with the multilaterals, Paris Club and non-Paris Club, and this is normally done during the IMF spring meetings. They do them in March, April, and then the annual meetings of the ADB, they are normally in May, and the World Bank IMF annual meetings in October or September or October, thereabout. So the last year, when the minister went to Bali, Minister Mtuli Nuwe, he re-engaged with all the creditors. We presented our Lima the way it is, but they were also having concern, looking at ourselves the way we are now treated as a low-income country. Though under the World Bank, they still call us a middle income, but we have been reclassified by the African Development Bank. The other part of the World Bank we haven't done. So in that, we as a government also, we re-engage with other institutions like our MEFMI, which is a debt management and macroeconomic institute. We do debt sustainability. We also reflect on how government should be moving. When we looked, I think the ZimCode presented to say we were looking at HIPIC. It's not automatic. It depends on the indicators. So when we rebase or we improve some of the issues, like what we did in 2009, moving from the Zim dollar to the US dollar, our GDP numbers improve, and then our debt numbers are lower, and then our GDP number to debt also improves, which shows that we cannot qualify for HIPI because there are thresholds which makes a country to qualify. But when we look technically as a country, we are saying if we are in arrears, though the GDP numbers have improved, we are still not sustainable. We need to clean our book, removing the arrears. So that is the issue the minister presented in Bali, and getting some feedback from all the bilaterals and multilaterals. Indications are that. And also we confirmed it as Minister of Finance when we did our technical exercise that if we use a commercial loan to clear our arrears, the problem we are having will not come out. We need either a very soft loan or a grant. But with the improvements we have in the economy now, I don't know whether we'll be able to convince any country to give us a grant to clear the arrears or to do a debt cancellation. That would be the best option. But we are saying failure to that, maybe if the G7 can give us a soft loan which has got IDA terms, what we call IDA terms, maybe the interest is 0, but we have a service fee of 0.75%, which we can use. But for us to move to that, that is where we are saying we need an IMF program, because we are talking with the Paris Club, we are the major creditors in the multilateral. At the same time, the multilaterals are saying we have to clear arrears. So we need to work with the IMF. And the way we work with the IMF is that we come up with our own country program, like the TSP, the Vision 2020. All the stakeholders have confirmed that the policies we've put in TSP are okay as long as we implement. So that is why in the budget, the minister in 2018, when he presented, he said now we have to move to come to fiscal sustainability. And looking at our debt, which he has confirmed was too high, there was no way out if ourselves we don't pay it as citizens or as government. So the 2% was introduced for that purpose. And to just tell the people here that what we have noted from October, when we introduced the 2% up to now, as an office, we are not going to the market to borrow, because we are using that money to finance the budget, and at the same time, we are not issuing any more new treasury bills. So that one is becoming positive. We are just hoping that we can maintain that. The unfortunate part is that we started implementing, now the rains were not favorable for us, and also the cyclone is not favorable for us. So the government has got a challenge. We need to attend to the people with the cyclone. We also need to attend to the people who are suffering with the hunger because of the drought. So the budget, being a small envelope, it will divert resources to those other challenging, but we are hoping that with the way we are moving, the other challenge we have been having in 2018 is the restructuring of domestic debt, because we were saying the option available for government now is to move the maturities of 2018, to move them forward, make them long-term. That is how other countries have addressed. So we are working with the financial sector to see what we can do. But from January to March, I think we've managed to contain the budget and also to remain within limits. And on the program, for us to meet the requirements of an IMF program, we are starting with what we call a staff-monitored program. A staff-monitored program is a program in which government will come with its own program which they feel they can manage. And the IMF staff will only come back to us and monitor, then report it to the board. The board is the one which discusses with the governors, who are the ministers of finance, representing different governments, and in some cases we have central bank governors, but most of them are just ministers of finance. So we are hoping that when the minister goes to Washington in April, he can have another round table in which he discusses the staff monitored program on the issues we are doing. We are taking nothing but policies listed in the TSP, present to the stakeholders, then we agree on the targets and then the time frame to say by when we should be meeting. And normally, because of we had another staff monitored program before in which Zimbabwe overperformed, we are hoping that this one, by end of the year, we'll be having a way forward on the arrears clearance. I think I have completed what I could say at technical level. Thank you very much. And so
thank you for your presentation. We are going to quickly move into plenary. We will probably just eat 5 minutes into your tea break so that we allow the Honorable Member of Parliament and Ms. Martha Mugweni for Minister of Finance, as well as Janet from SimCode, to also respond to some questions. So we are going to have one roving mic. We can use this one. We'll use this one.
Okay, thank you. My name is Richard. My question is directed to Mrs. Mugweni. I understand the rebasing of the GDP numbers was done sometime in October before the new monetary measures had been put in place. By this I mean, I'm referring to the issue of the rate. I understand by October 2018, our economy was predominantly a proper US dollar economy, at least by the official figures. Where does this put us with the new monetary measures that we witnessed recently, with the coming in of the rate? Are we not supposed to, because we are now, as far as I'm concerned, we are now a Zim dollar economy. So the base currency has changed. So we cannot continue to, as far as I understand it, we cannot continue to report the same numbers if we're at 20 billion by that time. And we now have a rate and the currency has changed. I think the numbers, there has to be some rebasing again of some sort. So how does that place us as a country? Thank you.
Thank you. My question is directed to Honorable Mona from our parliamentary committee. Is it possible for you to raise the question on, do we actually owe our former federation countries debt? Because it doesn't seem to be clear, and yet there appears to be continuing commodity swaps, whether it is fuel or maize moving between Zambia, Malawi, etc., which seems to be indicative of some debt that we are owing, and it is clearly not reflected in the numbers that were shared. And perhaps the Ministry of Finance can assist in that question. And then to the Ministry of Finance itself, yeah, the issue of debt, do your figures include the debt to China that is owed by the different parastatals that have been sanctioned via ministries, etc., etc.? Can you clarify Chinese debt?
Thanks very much. My name is Manyanya, Masimba Manyanya. To our honorable members, the years 2010 to where we are now are quite significant for ZimCode, in the sense that that's when a lot of advocacy on the economic and policy issues deepened. And surprisingly, that's when the debt mushroomed. Now, I would like to also make a reference to the debt assumption bill, our keynote experiences then, and the issue of the ballooning of the domestic debt from 225 million to 9.5 billion within a short space of five years. And then to the findings of the Auditor General's report. Are we not maybe misfocusing? Is the issue of debt a purely technical or management issue? Or is it not a political governance issue? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentations. My question, the first one, it goes to Janet. In your presentation, you didn't mention the issue of the 4.5 billion which is owed to government in taxes. What is the implication of that to the debt issue? Then the second question goes to Parliament. We have been facing a system problem. The violation of the Constitution, the Public Finance Management Act, and the RBZ Act. Do we have any punitive measures to the authorities who violated these constitutional as well as the legal provisions? Then around the systems question, have we changed the system? If we have a system which is allowing violation of legal and constitutional provisions, this is very scary. And in as far as we are trying to resolve the debt question so that we borrow again, the intention is that we refinance our development through borrowing. Have we solved the system question? Do we now have proper systems to ensure that we will not repeat what has been happening? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you once more. My name is Costa. My questions are directed to Ma'am, who is representing the Honorable Minister of Finance. You did mention that you have stopped issuing out treasury bills. I just want to briefly find out when and why. Secondly, would you care to share with us the reasons why the debt ballooned within such a very short space of time? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fadzi. I have a few questions. One is from Admire on the 4.5 owed to government in non-compliance in terms of paying taxes, and definitely it has got a link with debt. Because when there is non-compliance, mainly from these big companies, what the government then tends to depend, I think, on the soft targets. Zimra, you're sitting next to Zimra, and I hope they'll also be able to respond to this. But I think then the soft target becomes the citizen. And in this case, we have heard about the 2% tax that then the government initiated and actually started implementing in order to cover on the deficits and also to pay at the domestic level. So what happens is then they squeeze, the citizen continues to be squeezed in order to pay, actually to make the debt repayments that we are also talking about. They're not issuing TBs anymore and the like, which means the 2% in terms of the economics, it is working, but the impact in terms of transactions for the citizen is what is really appalling and devastating for the general populace. And in terms of the systems, whether we have changed in systems, and I know my colleagues will also answer to this, but I think as the government of Zimbabwe needs to live in terms of the legal and constitutional provisions, both in spirit and in letter, and I think there are alignments that will actually be done to the Public Finance Management Act that have been proposed, and also to the Public Debt Management Act that have been proposed. But to put things in just on paper is not enough, but to also implement and not only seek to please the international community, because I think the issue is the drive towards the re-engagement with the international community and just putting the frameworks in place, but without following them up. I also just wanted to, I was just interested in referring to section 129K of the Constitution that Honorable referred to. It says if the member has ceased to belong to a political party, which he or she was a member when elected to parliament, and the political party concerned by written notice to the speaker of or the president of the Senate, as the case may be, is declared and that the member has ceased to belong to it. So this speaks to the tenure and seats of members of parliament. So what he was referring to is the whipping system, which means even our constitution, in terms of the oversight role that we want the parliament to play. Our constitution limits that in terms of the whipping system, because they are also protecting the issue of their seat. So I think then debt is politics, Masimba, beyond the economics as well. I think there is the political economy around it and the interest. And it's not only local, but even when you look at the external debt, the global economy itself, there is, the creditor and debtor relationships. It is also very political, and it is a political tool in actual fact. And at the local level, refer to section 129K in terms of what Parliament can do, and this is the issue that we have to address as well, I think, if we are going to really have tangible results.
Thank you very much. Maybe I had about 3 or 4 questions. But to start with, Tete Sakile, you raised a very pertinent point regarding the issue of whether our sister countries, we do have some outstanding debt. And I think that is quite a topical question that we also need to interrogate as Parliament to see. And that's why Madam Janet was calling for the audit of the debt, so that we will ascertain exactly the origins of some of these outstanding obligations. So I think also as citizens, we are also mandated by the Supreme Constitution, Section 141, excuse me, which calls for your participation when it comes to business of Parliament. And also Section 149 of the same Constitution, which talks of your rights to petition Parliament. So at the end of the day, you find that as Parliament, we represent the views of the people. So I think in this puzzle, at times, the electorate would expect much more, and they won't be playing their part as well. So whenever we call for public hearings, it's also very important that people do participate. And eventually the bills will come before Parliament tabled and then becomes law. So at the end of the day, when you then say this is not being implemented, at the end of the day, it was also us to blame. Koma Simba, if I captured the word right, I mean the name right, you were talking of the domestic debt, that within a short space of time, it actually ballooned to about 9 billion. And why it happened that way, and whether it was driven by the political issues, technical or management issues. I think this requires a holistic approach. But at the end of the day, what we also need to bear in mind is when you are in a given country, there are some of the services that you cannot do without. And it is also very important that what is important is to ascertain exactly, and it also goes back to the issue of audit of the debt, to say, before we conclude, what was that money used for? So I think it is also very important, and we are also mandated as Parliament, and specifically when it comes to committees, which are the agents of Parliament. They drive the business of Parliament. And we've got our standing rules and orders, as order number 20, which actually allows us to interrogate the ministers so as to ascertain some of these issues. So I think it is very important as well to find out what exactly transpired. And I can synchronize this question with what is it Parliament that is doing, from my brother in Chet, who said, Parliament, what is it that you are doing in order to punish the perpetrators of that are actually violating our constitution? And I think it is also very important that Janet raised 129K. 129K this is what came from the people of Zimbabwe. The constitution, because this is the supreme constitution. So at the end of the day, you now need to balance the two. To say if a political party has got powers, there is a thin line to say, do you drive the agenda of the political party? And I'm sure we come from various political parties, and I must serve the interests of my master. So at the end of the day, how then do you balance when it comes to the whipping vis-a-vis the implementation? Am I being aggressive to the minister or vice versa? So at the end of the day, you also, like I indicated, that you have got the right to change any legislation that you think is not in order. So I think as long as we have this, whereby I become vocal. At times I might say, no, but I still need to feed my family. This is an example. Then I put some brakes. And especially to some of us who are chairpersons of committees, you then need to say, is it really worth to pursue this agenda for the... So it's up to an individual because of the constitution. And I'm not blaming political parties, but I'm saying they are mandated by the constitution. It's not a political party constitution. It's a supreme constitution. So it's up to us, the citizens of Zimbabwe, to say some of these clauses, what is it that we need to do? That is why I give you a section 149 that you can approach Parliament to amend, to raise any issues that you think are not pertinent or are not in sync with what is actually happening. So I thought maybe at the end of the day, this calls for a holistic approach, and being equipped with that in mind as citizens, we can do a lot. And normally, it's easier to do a blame game. But as citizens, let us approach this and try to see how best can we approach the issues that are bedeviling our beautiful nation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm left with only one question on the GDP and the monetary policy. But it's safe to say that the actual comprehensive response can come from the central bank. But from my understanding, what happened in 2009, when we moved from the Zim dollar to the US dollar, is exactly what will happen if we have to move to a Zim dollar era or whatever currency, we call it local currency. So the US component will not change, it will remain. What can happen, for example, when the governor announced the monetary policy, he indicated that the exchange rate was 2.5. So if it's 2.5 or let's say 3, and our GDP was 25, what should happen is now we multiply that GDP to change it to local currency by 3, and we have a new number. So we won't have the US component will remain if we want to remain to report in US dollar, because for your information, our debt to external creditors is in foreign currency. Some of it is in US dollar, British pounds, Japanese yen, all the issues. So what happens is we use an exchange rate. And when we are doing debt management on a daily basis, we have one officer who has to go to the market, look at the exchange rate, we put it in our computer, and then the calculation is done automatically. So if I want to give you my report in local currency, it will show the local currency figure. And if I report in US dollar, it will show the US dollar. So that will not change, but maybe I will double check with my colleagues in the central bank. They can give you. The other question I think was on the Chinese loan, whether they are in our database. All the external loans are there. The 8.16 I said includes also Chinese loans. So all the loans are in that. And if you go into our Blue Book, Schedule 1, you will see that we have listed all the creditors, including China. So we report on all creditors. We don't discriminate. Thank you very much.
Just one or two more reflections, then we close off this.
Thank you. Just directing again the question, and I'll keep it technical since your request was that we remain technical. Your issue of rebasing, I think let's be fair in saying the research would have looked at the numbers before rebasing, and we were out of kilter by then. We were already breaching the levels. Can we accept that as fact? Because it's pretty pointless for us to say we've rebased and so we are now performing. I don't think that is correct. So I think before we rebase, the research can be accepted for what it is. If we rebase, then it's fair that the researchers go back and look at the figures. But here's the trick, and let's be brutally honest with each other. If I am a pension fund, and listen to this very carefully, we have effectively destroyed a debt market that was functional and effective. by playing the games we are playing of hyperinflating and allowing our local savers and investors to be punished. So even your attempt now as Ministry of Finance to stretch your debt from local, short-term, to medium, long-term is going to be in vain. Because if I'm a shrewd fund manager or a shrewd banker, then I'm not going to play these games. I'm losing value. And what is most criminal is that it is our pensioners who are paying for this game that we are playing. It is a game. In the sense that if we keep hyperinflating our way and then retiring the debt in that fashion, it's not right, it is not just. So just as an individual with a mother who is a pensioner, and I speak on behalf of my mum here, she served government as a matron for over 50 years. Harare Hospital, Paranyatu Hospital. She counts on me now to pay her, to maintain her existence and survival. That's not right. She had a pension. She contributed to a pension. And so what we are doing now by rebasing or allowing our currency to slide or whatever just won't cut it for us to have a sustainable economy. What we need is the discipline of compliance with regards to those debt levels on a technical basis. It's downright unfair as well for a foreigner to lend us money in US dollars, and then for a domestic person, bank or pension fund or individual to buy treasury bills or government stock, and then, more or less on the same terms. But 5 years, 10 years down the road, the foreigner's debt is still denominated in US dollars. It doesn't lose value, and it gets restructured, and you ask for terms based on IMF programs or whatever, and you will still pay it eventually. But the local pension fund, hard-earned savings of pensioners, then loses value. And poof, it's gone. So I think we got to come back, and I'm not saying it is the fault of the debt office, but I'm saying if we are going to sustain this in future and have short-term, medium-term, and long-term financial markets, which we had, and in so doing we have ruined, the only way we can engender confidence is to demarcate that debt in US dollars as well. Then we are on par, but not otherwise. So obviously that's clearly not your space. You are managing, you are monitoring the limits. All we are asking for is that we confine ourselves to the limits, based on whatever currency that we're looking at. But the rebasing has a trick which I think we are all too familiar with now, and we cannot accept going into the future. Otherwise, we destroy what's left, the semblance of that treasury bill market which we had started, and then a debt market which we hope to enter into, and hopefully maybe a long-term international debt market. I think our credibility is at stake as a country. So I think that point then is made. So we can re-look at the figures and then look at it. Then I want to come to the conflict, Honorable, of a parliamentarian. I think we would be short-sighted if we then said to ourselves, I am conflicted as a parliamentarian. If I voice my opinion, then I get whipped. But we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We are all Zimbabweans, and we know what's going on. A debt must be repaid. In the private sector, we focus it on, your reputation. If you don't repay a debt, you history. And so it is pure discipline. We cannot continue to accrue arrears. We cannot continue to reschedule loans. We have to live within our means. And if it means we've got to dispose of those parastatals, then we should. Because they are assets, They are viable, some of them, and would be better placed in private hands with regards to why we have got the debt assumption bill. So we understand, and maybe our grace is the sanction story. So I'm very much in support of, I'm a market player, so it was very difficult, to work within the civil society movement, but I could understand. We have a nation that is carrying a huge debt, and we are conflicted because the financial markets won't like the signals that we're sending to them. But then how do we come to resolving this issue as parliamentarians? I think as parliamentarians, we've got to step up to the plate and come up with sustainable solutions for our economy. Because anything short of that, we fudged it in the past. I think we're trying to fudge it again in a way, and I think fudgeability doesn't work. So I like what's coming out now of Ministry of Finance in the sense that it's a balanced budget. We are no longer issuing treasury bills, and hopefully we'll get to that Lima closure in terms of an agreement and then offer some relief to the market. But I would argue that never again. That's the legislation I would be calling for. We've played this game once, twice, 3 times. I did my research in 1990 on public debt. That limit was at 20, it was moved to 30, we're back at 20. But if we violate it again, we're back. So we violated it in the 90s. We saw hyperinflation all the way to 2008. And then we get back again to 2018, if we can draw the line there, and say we're back to where we were. And now we play another game again? I would say no more. And so as civil society, as Zimbabweans, and as parliamentarians, I think we will give you the teeth that you need to say no more. We want sustainable long-term savings. We want debts that are performing nationally in as much as we ask the private sector to also perform on private sector debt. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We are going to close off this session to allow us for a tea break and be able to catch up with our next session. So can we be back for tea at 11:30? For those that still have questions, I am going to just be in Idi Amin and not allow you to continue with the conversations in this session, but that we can have bilateral engagements with our speakers during tea break so that we can catch up with time. So I'm going to just close off the session. Allow me to close off the session.